ownership. And I had a conversation yesterday with Dr. Claude Anderson, and who's my buddy, and he is a mentor, friend, all that good stuff. And we were talking about black ownership and black wealth and things like that. And one thing Dr. Anderson mentioned that all of us should know is that um, there was a lot of wealth after the Civil War that was taken away from black people that actually went into white ownership. That this wealth put in places like the Freedmen's Bank,
Who's my buddy?
money that was taken away from us, that money was put into ownership, land ownership, and business ownership in the white community. And the thing is that um, black ownership is something that doesn't get really talked enough about. Not just why we need more black ownership, but also just what does black ownership, what should it look like? How do we become black owners? And what things does ownership apply to that are more important than money? When I think about black ownership and why it's important, I'm not really thinking about money as much. I mean, money matters. Don't get me wrong. Money's very important, but it goes so much deeper than just the money. I hope you believe me when I tell you this. It's so much deeper than the money. And a lot of it really just sinks back into topics that we've discussed regularly in the Black Business School, like economic warfare. I actually talk about that a lot. And that was another topic Dr. Anderson and I talked about yesterday, where he was basically, I think I said something to him like, I said, I don't think black people, we're very prepared for things. We don't really prepare. We just kind of respond when the bad things happen. We complain, we get upset, we say, oh my God, it's racism, that's terrible. How did they do that to us? But we don't really sit back and say, well, what could they do to us? And how do we stop it? How do we prepare for that? And that was what led him down a trail of conversations about the lack of preparedness. And now now his, just as a little side note, he's a believer that there could be some sort of civil war that takes place at some point. I thought about things also like nuclear war and stuff like that. And in case you want to talk about that, my wife and I are actually preparing to some extent. We've got some meals ready to eat in the garage, those MREs that the military uses. We've also got some disaster preparedness, plans laid out, and the generator and all that good stuff. But we're not as prepared as we should be, but we're getting there. So so to kind of hit that conversation, I got my shirt on. This is Black Owned Business, because this is where we're really going to talk about it. And we're not just going to talk about why the black owned businesses matter and all that good stuff. We're really going to talk about it. I want to go to level 2 and level 3 of this so we can really understand why it matters, the proper way to kind of approach our financial meditations around black owned business, and also even how to understand what it means to be wealthy, what it means to be powerful, things like that. All right, so what I'm going to do quickly, since I was very rude again this morning, I didn't say hi to some of you, a lot of you that came in, Levon and Eileen and Donna, and let's see, Stuart. I see he says we must be proactive. Who else is in here? Denise and Elaine and Stephen, George, Christian, Calvin, Regina. Kendall says, love the poster of the Honorable Alhaj Malik Al-Shabazz, Minister Malcolm X. Thank you. I bought Malcolm today because because I feel like I said this not long ago. I said I think we owe Malcolm X a big apology. Not because, some of us have always listened to him, always respected him, but I don't think as a community, I think today as a community, we understand his message more than ever. And he was really big on nationalism and ownership as the key to power. And also just not being tricked, kind of not being fooled into false coalitions that end up diluting our ownership and leading us to replace our businesses and our land ownership with jobs and student loans and the chance to vote for a politician, things like that. All those things matter. All those things are fine. But you have to have some things that you actually own. You have to have that capital base. We've talked about that capital base before. What is the capital base? The capital base is just a bunch of resources that you own, that you control, that you use to achieve the things that you need. Give me a yes if you understand that. Let me know if you can visualize this. Give me a yes if you're following this. A capital base is basically it's like a home base. It's an economic home base. If you play baseball or something, you can't play baseball without a home base. If you play tag or it or whatever, you have a home base. If you're military, you have a home base. So home base is your stronghold. Let me know if tell me if you're following this. I want you to understand this. So your stronghold. So I want you to ask yourself, if you're black in America, what is your economic stronghold? Where's your base? Do you have a home base? Do we typically have a base? Like where are our economic strongholds? Like where are the places we can go to get jobs when nobody else will give us a job? Where's the place where we can get financing when nobody else will finance us? Where are the places you can go to get what you need in case the world turns its back on you? A home base might also just be going home. Think about it. Whenever you were a kid and whenever if you got in a fight, if the bullies were chasing you home from school, you went home. You ran home, right? You didn't run to the neighbor's house. You didn't run and banging on door to door hoping that somebody will save you. You ran to your house. If your home was nearby, you'd run to your home where your mother was or your father was because you knew you'd be safe there. And so imagine going through life with no home. That's what we are when as black people, when we don't have an economic capital base, we are like the kid who's being bullied who doesn't have a home to go to. He's an orphan, he has no parents. Nobody cares about him. So instead of us being able to go to our home base to get what we need, we end up just sort of out here stranded, begging any and everybody to give us whatever we need in order to get by. And then what happens is you kind of end up just being slapped around from one pimp to another pimp. Because you don't have any place you can go where somebody actually loves you and cares about you. And I'm talking about economic love. So when you're talking about black ownership, I think about it deeper. I think of ownership not just in terms of money and wealth. I think of ownership in terms of economic love, support, security, safety. Safety, I think about safety. We're heavily traumatized people. We get traumatized a lot. We've been traumatized before. We'll keep getting traumatized in the future because we have a unique history in this country. There's no other group of people. We do Powernomics training every Wednesday night. I hope you'll join us next time. I think you're going to learn a lot there. And Dr. Anderson, in his book, The Black History Reader, was talking about how black people after slavery used to get arrested for looking white people in the eye. Or you could get arrested for talking back to a white person. You could get arrested for counting your money, counting your change in front of a white person. You can get arrested for talking to a white man without taking your hat off. All these things. So you were always if a white person accused you of a crime, you were going to go to jail. And they would often accuse us of crimes to take our assets. A black person who owned something at that time was seen as a huge threat, or maybe there would be some jealousy. So if you're jealous of a black person that owns a shop and or you want that shop, or they own land and you want to try to get that land, well, you accuse them of a crime and you get them locked up. And then when they get locked up, they can't pay their taxes or whatever, or you confiscate the land because now they're a criminal. And so this is that linkage in terms of how the development of what we consider the modern day justice system has massive economic implications. So effectively, when you talk about black ownership, I again, I see love, I see security, I see war, I see economic intelligence, and I think maybe a good place to start here. I'm going to share this slide really quick. And by the way, if you want to join us for Powernomics training, just text the word stock to 87948 and I'll send you a link when we do Powernomics training this upcoming Wednesday. Just text the word stock to 87948. If you're on that list, you'll get a link from me. All right. So today's economic reflection, let me see if I can pull this up on the screen. Here we go. Is very simple. Again, this is you can fill this out in your book, 30 Days to Wealth and Power. You can get a copy at drboycebooks.com. And the question is very simple. Do you own a home or any property? Uh, how do you plan to begin the process of acquiring more? So in this particular case, on this particular reflection, we're talking about ownership, but I'm really talking also specifically about land ownership or home ownership. So let's talk about this in a couple of levels. Number one, the leading divider between poor people and middle class people is home ownership. For most middle class people, the majority of their wealth is in their home. The home is the one place where you are literally gaining ownership of an asset consistently by doing what you naturally do. We've explained and we've discussed consistently how wealth is just an accumulation process. It's pretty much doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And then all those little efforts pile up into one big accumulation. And then you look at that big pile of results and you say, that's my wealth. That's what I have. And so ultimately, that really, in my mind, speaks to what it means to live a purposeful existence versus one that's without purpose. A purposeful existence is where I say to myself, I every single day I've got 8,760 hours in a year, 365 days a year. So I've got about 87,000 hours in a decade. Can I consistently during that time do things that are going to lead to some sort of accumulation that I can be proud of? If I work out every single day, then maybe I count the number of workouts I'm doing so that I can be proud of myself when I've done 100 workouts or 200 workouts because I'll know that I'm going to be in better shape. I'm going to start losing weight. If I am saving money or getting money, if I'm consistently depositing money into my savings and my investing account and the money's growing, then I can look back at my accumulation and say, look at that. Right. That to me is purposeful because what does that mean? Well, that means you're not really you're being efficient with your energy. Every single day, everything that you do on a regular basis, every habit you form, everything you do consistently, in my view, most of it should be attached to some kind of accumulation so you can look back and see what you have to show for all the time and all the energy that you put out. That's very different from the way a lot of people live when they live in a very unconscious way. So remember, this is financial consciousness training. We're trying to look at things differently. We're trying to see things at a higher level. Unconscious people live like animals do. Animals might do the same thing every day, but they're not thinking about any accumulation process. They're not thinking, wow, a cow doesn't sit in the grass and say, wow, I have chewed this grass for 8,000 days in a row. Or a pig doesn't say, wow, I've been in this slop every single day for the last 12 years. Wow, I've got a lot of experience sitting in slop. I've accumulated something here. I'm an experienced slop sitter, right? Like animals don't think that way, and a lot of humans we don't think that way. We have a million things that we do every day, habits that we have all the time that lead to absolutely nothing. This creates a sense of emptiness and worthlessness, a lot of waste. We will spend money. Think about this. Let's just start with the money, since we talk about the money. Think about and if you're in this category, don't feel bad. Everybody does this. Think about imagine if you went back and had to really calculate how much money you spent on going to restaurants your whole entire life. Imagine if I wrote you a check right now for every penny that you ever spent in a restaurant for the last 25 years plus interest. Most of you would probably be rich. How many of you would be rich instantly if I was to write you a check right now for every nickel that you've ever spent in a restaurant, going back to 2012, 2002, 1997? How many? Seriously, a lot of us would be very rich if you were to have that as an accumulation process. If you were to say, "Oh my God, look at all this money I spent." Well, what if I gave you $1 every time you went to the bathroom since you were little? Like that would be like a ton of money, right? Or what if I gave you money every time you sat down for a meal, or every time you had a conversation, or whatever, or every time you took a walk, right? What I mean is this: in our lives are shaped pretty much by these habits, by these things that we do every day. Like right now, we're doing 30 days to wealth and power, so we're forming a new habit. I want you to try to see if you can find some habits that can lead to an accumulation process that will not make you feel like you've wasted your life. And then what that does is that certainly helps you feel more fulfilled and more qualified and capable in the world, like you really accomplished something. But it also creates more purpose. It creates a consistent purpose. Where if I say, for example, if I say, you know, I don't know how to raise a perfect child or a rich kid or whatever, but I'm going to mark on a piece of paper every single time I talk to my child about money. And my goal is to talk to my child about money once a day, every day until they get older. Just have some 2-minute conversation about finances. And then when they get 18, I can look back and say, wow, I have 5,242 conversations we've had about money. I did my job, right? And then when you talk about wealth and ownership, what are you pouring into on a daily basis is going to lead to some sort of accumulation. For example, one day I sat down and I calculated how many YouTube videos I've done, and I realized I did over 22,000 YouTube videos. I said, okay, good job, boys. You're really sticking to your purpose. You've been consistent. You've stuck to something. A lot of us don't stick to things. We bounce around from one thing to another, or we consistently do something and that doesn't amount to anything and it ends up being a big waste. A lot of money gets wasted because we're consistently doing things like paying the landlord and getting nothing for it, except a place to live that month. We're paying off the car note consistently, nothing to show for it, except for a depreciated car that has no value after 5 or 6 or 7 years, right? Spending money at the mall consistently, but we have nothing to show for it. But I bet you that the people who are collecting your money, I bet you they're accounting for what they're receiving. I bet you they've got some books somewhere that can show that you bought a house for your landlord. After 10 years, you pay your rent consistently. After 10, 15 years, you bought a house for your landlord. They have a wealth accumulation that is a result of your efforts because you did not claim the results of that accumulation process. So I want you to really think about this and figure out something. Right? Everybody, you don't have to, everything doesn't have to be thought of that way, but there has to be something in your life, a couple things in your life that matter. I encourage you to focus around the areas of health, wealth, and relationships where you are engaged in some sort of daily activity that's leading to some sort of long-term accumulation process so that you don't get older and look back and say, man, I've been busting my butt all these years, spending all this money, doing all this stuff for other people and living this whole life. And I can't think of anything I've accomplished, I've accumulated. You got to accumulate something. That's what wealth is. Wealth is an accumulation process. The thing about wealth is most wealth is not related to money. That's another thing I want you to always remember that. All right, so home ownership. Let's talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about home and land ownership in particular. Ownership is very important, not just for the financial reasons. Owning things is critical because ownership really is a matter of national security for your family and for your community. There is there is a type of power that comes with ownership that you never get when you are the renter or you are the borrower or you are there temporarily. And ownership also requires focus, commitment, and responsibility, where you are committed to building something that you actually own and control. And ownership isn't talked about enough. Ownership is something in the Black community that's a complex topic because I see people that ridicule Black-owned businesses. I saw a professor that wanted to debate with me, and I didn't want to debate with him because I said I'm not here to fight with you. But he literally seemed to feel that Black ownership was a waste of time because most Black-owned businesses don't have a lot of money. And I said, well, most white-owned businesses didn't have a lot of money in the beginning either, but somebody was committed to the consistent process of pouring into those businesses to turn them into multi-billion dollar companies. I can tell you a million stories about how Sam Walton struggled immensely and Walmart was on the brink of bankruptcy, but he consistently poured into Walmart until he eventually owned this company that turned all his kids into billionaires. He's got several children that are on the Forbes top 10, top 20 list. Several kids. Sam Walton, bad boy, right? But he did this because he had this raggedy little corner store called Walmart, and he and he just kept pouring into this thing to grow it into something. I could tell you stories about the McDonald's brothers when they started McDonald's and the struggles that they went through. We could talk about UPS being started by teenagers who were riding their bicycles to deliver packages. None of these businesses were serious when they started. None of these businesses had money. None of these businesses meant anything to anybody except for the owner and the owner's mama. But somebody believed in that business and loved that business enough to keep pouring into it and stop worrying about what it looked like today and thought about what it could look like tomorrow. So you spend too much time focused on what you got right now and don't spend enough time thinking about what you could have if you keep on going. You stop thinking about where you are on the road. You might be at the beginning of the journey, but it's a long damn road and you got to keep driving. Think about where you're going to be if you keep driving. Imagine if I drive down this road every day for the next 20 years. I'll be really far down the road. I'll travel thousands of miles, but instead, sometimes we'll get to the beginning of the journey, the first 100 yards, and we'll look at somebody that's 1,000 miles ahead of us, and we'll say, "Look at me, I'm nothing, I'm nobody, I can't go anywhere." So ownership. A lot of times, the lack of ownership is deeply connected to the lack of self-esteem. People who believe in their vision, people who love themselves, people who have pride in their community, people who have faith, proud people, they want to own and control something. Strong, proud people don't want to just live on borrowed time. Strong, proud people who have high self-esteem don't want to just be somebody's guest or somebody's economic babysitter. Strong, proud people say, you know what, I'm taking pride in my little business because I'm a proud person. I want to own something, and this reflects me. This is my access or opportunity to become one of the economic gods in this economy and create something in my image, not just celebrate something that's in your image. Right? See that's so really ownership is deeply connected to power, pride, and all these other insecurity, all these things that we don't talk about so much, right? A lot of people talk about ownership in terms of money, and money is just one minute aspect of the benefits of ownership because sometimes, and it's important to understand this because sometimes ownership does not feel good because it doesn't come with money. I don't know if anybody's run a business, but sometimes when you create a black owned business, sometimes you make less money than your employees. Sometimes you're the only one who didn't get paid. I've gone through this. I've gone through many months where everybody got paid but me. And so if all I did was measure the value of ownership by how much money I made that month, then I wouldn't want to be an owner. I say, no, no, no. I think I want to be an employee because being an employee is easier and there's less responsibility and it's a lot like being a it's like maybe if I have a rough day being a dad and I say, I don't want to be a dad. I don't want to run the household. It's too hard right now. I want to just be one of the kids because the kids have no responsibility. I just want to be a teenager again. Right? And there are people that do that. There are people that you have a lot of 45, 50-year-old teenagers out here that don't want the responsibility of doing anything bigger than themselves or something that's going to benefit other people or leave a legacy or any of these other things. Sometimes we see ownership as something for people that have the confidence or maybe people who what's the word, who are just more qualified than us. And I believe on a subconscious level, I believe we deeply believe white people are just better at things than we are. Like there are a million things I could tell you that a white man did that you would not be shocked by. But then if I say, as a black person, I think we should do the same thing, where people will say that's impossible. I've heard that. I've heard people talk about something, and if I say, well, as a black person, I think we can do X, Y, Z, and they say that's not possible. And I say that's really interesting because there's thousands of white people who've already done it. Why would you say it's easy for them, impossible for them, but impossible for us? I don't understand how they could have done this thousands of times, but when I say a black person should do it, you say, "Oh no, that's not possible. We can't do that." So what you're really referring to is this inherent inferiority complex, this belief that we somehow are inferior, and the best we can do is connect to somebody else's life raft and be a part of somebody else's institution. Let them be the owners. Let us be the employees and the subordinates and the customers. Let them be the parents, and we become the children. They're the owners, the controllers, and we're kind of the economic babysitters. So we go to college and we learn how to manage other people's businesses, and we don't spend much time learning how to build our own. So when you talk about ownership in general, I want you to think not just about the money. I want you to understand the importance of the power. A lot of what you experience as racism on the, let me ask y'all a question. Give me a quick yes or no. How many of you have experienced racism on the job? How many of you have ever gone through a situation where you had a job and you felt that they weren't treating you right because you were black? Either you didn't get the job, or somebody else got the raise, or somebody else got your promotion, or somebody was treating you poorly, or you got fired on your day off, or you went through a million of things that a lot of black people go through. Give me a guess if you've gone through this. Okay. Well, let me tell you, I'm gonna say this. I'm gonna sound like a cynic right now. I got Malcolm with me, so I'm feeling comfortable saying this. I think the reason you were treated badly is because white people don't like you very much. They just don't. I don't think they do. I don't. I'm not saying they hate you all the time. I'm not saying that they're all bad people. I don't believe all white people are trying to be bad people, but they just don't like you that much. And maybe I'm also riled up because I talked to Dr. Claude Anderson yesterday, and he was telling me about how many black people got lynched in the North. They thought that going north was safe because they could get away from slavery. He said they went up north and got lynched in New York City. Right? He said they don't talk about that. How many black people got lynched in the North? So they just don't like you, right? But then also part of what you experience as racism is really just unfair treatment that comes from an imbalance of power. It comes from the fact that you volunteered yourself for a situation where the other party was going to have a disproportionate amount of power. And a lot of this comes from a lack of consciousness because rather than thinking long term about how do I long term make sacrifices now that'll put me in a power position long term, you were thinking, how do I get a job so I can pay my rent by Friday? Right? You were thinking short term. A lack of consciousness is short term thinking. Consciousness is when you elevate and you see long term, right? Like a person that's 2 feet tall can't see the same as a person who's standing 100 feet tall. Do you understand? So consciousness literally is elevating so you can really see where you are, and then you see where you're going, where you went, and where you could go. right? So you're going to the third, fourth, and fifth dimension of your visibility. So owners are people who tend to see things on the big scale. Like the owner is like the person who builds the cage. The non-owner or the person that operates on that lower vibrational frequency is the person who's living in the cage, and they're responding to what's in the cage. Whereas the owner is thinking about how the cage is built and how to make sure everybody stays in it. That's capitalism. Capitalism is a big cage. So, so what I experienced, my belief is that a lot of what we go through on the job in terms of unfair treatment is not, I don't believe it's white people waking up in the morning and saying, how do I just be mean to a black person today? I think that's why they get so offended by people like me when I talk about racism. It's because they start to feel that guilt and they start to say, well, I'm not a bad person. I'm not trying to be a bad person. Why would you point to me? Why are you so mean to me? I think a lot of it is because you're different. Your cultures are different. Your views are different. Your perspectives are different. Your values are different. If you watch the OJ Simpson trial, anybody remember the OJ trial? And when they would show videos of how differently white people and black people reacted to the verdict? I mean, white people were crying like it was a funeral. Black people were jumping up and down like it was a birthday party. Like it was crazy. It was so crazy to see how differently the reactions were. That said to me, okay, we see the world different. We just see the world differently. And I don't know if there's always anything wrong with that all the time, to be honest with you. I don't Diversity of perspective has never been a threat to me in my mind. The only time it becomes a threat is when one group has so much power over the other that they can force you into their worldview. When you are occupied and dominated to the point where when you say, I want to go left, they say, no, no, no. If you want to live, if you want to survive, if you want to feed your family, you're going to go right with me. Right. And then you experience that as racism and unfairness because maybe you went left anyway, and then they kicked you out of the group because economics is a group sport, right? They kick you out of their economic group, which is called a corporation or a business or a university. They kick you out of the group because you want to go left when they told you to go right, but you don't understand that part of the reason that you're in that situation is because you chose that situation. You didn't think enough about what it means to be in a space where you can go left and it's okay. So ownership is a lot of it's about power. A lot of it's about various forms of security. A lot of it also, I believe, in fact, that we should not measure Black economic success the way we've done it up until this point. The way a lot of people measure Black economic success, in my view, is very primitive. It reflects economic immaturity. It just doesn't really add up to true economic success and true economic power. Let me explain what I mean. If you ask somebody, a lot of people, let's say one of us educated Negroes who went to fancy schools and got our fancy schooling and everything, and we get our little master's degree or something, and you say, well, how are you doing financially? And they're going to say, great. Well, what does that mean? Well, what would you look at to see if they're doing well? Well, you might look at what kind of car they drive. These are signals in finance. There's a whole theory in finance called signaling, by the way. There's thousands of research papers written about how people send economic signals about private information, right? So signals you might send, just like a girl, if a girl likes a guy, how she might signal to the guy she likes him, like flip her hair or laugh at his jokes, right? Or the man might look at you a certain way. He's sending signals, right? So we signal to each other our economic status, right? This is why you go to the club. Guys who have money will do things to signal to women that they have plenty of money, and maybe the women signal in their own way, right? It's not usually through money. It might be through something attractive, their hair, their look, their dress, or what, right, or whatever, right? You get what I mean? Okay. So the signals you might see that make people say somebody's doing well could be what kind of car they drive, what kind of clothes they have. If they have like Gucci and Louis and stuff like that, that's a signal. What kind of apartment they have. If they live in a really nice apartment, a $5,000 a month apartment in the middle of some fancy in New York City. Well, in New York, maybe let's go to 10,000 a month because New York's expensive. So a $15,000 a month apartment in New York City. Maybe a nice job. Right. They just got hired as the vice president of micro widgets at Butt Crack Incorporated, whatever, right? So they got some job that where they're making tons of money, and so you would say, okay, this person's doing well. That's how you measure their economic strength. when unfortunately that's a flawed way to sort of view things, right? So maybe you think someone's doing well also because you went out to dinner and they spent $500 on dinner. Well, a lot of those things are flawed signals because you're not looking at what's underneath. It's like if you're a doctor and you're doing a diagnosis, someone may look perfectly healthy, but they can have HIV, right? And so, in order for you to understand what's really going on with their health, you have to do certain tests. You have to go deeper. You got to analyze the blood. You got to look. You can't just look at them and say, "Oh, he looks healthy. He looks good. Everything's fine." No, no, no. There's a lot of healthy looking people who have significant problems that are going to kill them. So the same thing is true when you're trying to determine a person's financial health. A person who has a great job with a fancy apartment and a nice car and nice clothes and drops $100 bills at the club could also be a person that is deep, deep, deep in debt, has no financial security, like meaning that if their job disappears, they're done. No assets, no ownership, no nothing. The house may be owned by the bank. The car is owned by the bank. It's a depreciating asset that's owned by somebody else. Maybe he's spending money because he's getting cash advances off his credit card, or you're going out to fancy restaurants. Maybe he's just maxing out the credit card to do that, right? So a lot of these are false signals, and so people. But the thing is, these signals work when you're dealing with people that don't understand what true economic security looks like. So what then happens, and I studied this extensively when I wrote my book Financial Lovemaking when I was at Syracuse University. A lot of women would be excited about dating some of these guys who were maybe athletes who were making lots of money on their jobs as athletes. And then what would happen is there would be some sort of economic catastrophe, right? The team cuts them, and next thing you know, the wife. This is a real story. I'm thinking about one. I'm gonna reference one particular story where there's a woman who married a guy in college who was gonna go to the NFL. He was a football star. He was a big man on campus. He got drafted by the Seahawks. He played for the Seahawks for less than a year. They cut him, and he suddenly his salary was gone. He also had no other skill to make money other than playing football. So he would stay home, work out every day, hoping that one of the NFL teams would call him, and then they would call on and off for him to kind of be on the scout team, and so he make a little money from that. Then eventually he got injured, and he wasn't playing at all. He was at home every day, and she had to work. She was working two jobs to pay all the bills, and had a husband that was sitting at home every day, using drugs because he become addicted to painkillers. Because in football, when you're desperate, you're going to keep taking whatever drugs you can to try to stay on the field. Well, those drugs are addictive in many cases, so he gained an addiction to painkillers. He was extremely depressed. He would drink a lot, and then eventually that's when the beating started. Right, he started to beat her up, and also he had no savings, no assets, no ownership, no nothing. So she married this guy thinking, okay, we're going to be good financially because my husband's going to the NFL, without understanding the entirety of what it looks like to see whether or not somebody's economically healthy, economically whole. To even understand, does this person actually own any assets that will allow them to be secure in the event that the job that they have doesn't work out? And so this is why things like that $5 a day plan that I've been trying to get you guys to consider for your kids and grandkids is so important, because you're going to start off with that first pillar of wealth and financial security, which is actual ownership. They will own shares of stock. In fact, if I were to tell you how to own a business in 5 minutes, it would be very easy. I could tell you literally how to be a business owner in 5 minutes. You ready? You want to hear it? You know how to be a business owner in 5 minutes or less? Just go buy shares of stock. If you buy shares in Apple, you own a piece of Apple. If you buy shares in McDonald's, you own a piece of McDonald's. If you buy shares in Starbucks, you're an owner in Starbucks. So owning a business literally could be as simple as buying consistent shares of stock. And then what happens is that your income goes up and down with that of the corporation. So what I would say to you is that when you reflect on ownership and you fill out the financial reflection in your journal, I want you to really sit down and say, what do I actually own? And then if you don't own anything, that's okay. Just figure out a plan. Here's some ideas on things you can own. Number one, start small, buy some shares of stock and buy it consistently. That should be the most important thing that you do, in my opinion, because your financial security comes from having assets that you can lean on in case you have a financial emergency. That's the first step. You got to get yourself out of trouble. You got to get yourself out of this constant state of strugglenomics and get to the point where you can actually start to prosper. Number two, if you get together with family, I would encourage you to talk about money with family. Share that economic consciousness just once a week, once a month. Sit together with family on a Zoom call and just talk to each other and just say, okay, at some point, let's talk about money. money, economics. Let's talk about something we can do together as a family financially. Maybe we form a susu. Maybe we form an investment club. Maybe we don't do anything like that. Maybe we talk about what we're doing in business and just congratulate each other and cheer each other on. Maybe if I tell you what I'm doing and you tell me what you're doing, we can somehow come together and think about something that we could have been doing together, but we never got around to it because we never talked to each other. Why didn't we talk to each other? Because we were both working so much on our jobs that we never saw each other because we love the corporate plantation so much. We love the plantation more than we love our family in some cases, at least in terms of action. So, so just like I was telling you guys yesterday, I was just so you never grow, you never get to the point where it's easy. You never get to the point where you're not black anymore. You never get to the point. I know I haven't gotten to the point where I've just got all this down as second nature. I talk to you all about this because I'm trying to get better at it. I'm trying to understand it. I know that there's gold buried underneath the surface of conversations I still have not had with certain people that could be in my life that I haven't talked to enough about economics to find out where the opportunities lie. I'm going through the same thing you're going through. I might be the teacher, but I am also the student. I don't think you should ever stop being the student. So here's, I mentioned to you all the other day, I was talking to my sister, who's a medical doctor, and we just got to talking, and we realized we had a shared dream of owning a yacht, and we rented a yacht 2 years ago, and it was so much fun. And so she's doing well as a doctor. I'm doing okay, and I said, let's research what it would look like to buy one of these boats and then make money from it by renting it out to other people. And then we have this boat we can use, a couple times a year. And it's also a great tax write-off, right? A lot of times these little conversations will pop up that you never would have had otherwise. And I believe these conversations need to lead back to ownership. Ownership, ownership, ownership is the essential ingredient of Black wealth that has to be discussed and considered on every single level. The last piece I'll say to you about ownership is that there is a way to be an owner of a company, a way to be an owner of an asset, a way that a good owner thinks. So when you're talking about, and by the way, Mary, thank you for your comment. I see she said Mary says I'm her hero. Well, you're my hero, Mary. So bless you. Thank you for saying that. One of my favorite people is a woman named Dr. Mary Stoddard. Actually, let me make a note on where I was so I can go back to it. But I want to tell you all about Mary Stoddard. Let me tell you about Mary Stoddard in terms of Black possibility and why I think Dr. Mary Stoddard and her husband, Dr. Marcus Stoddard, should be two of the most famous Black people in America. Let me tell you the story. We don't hear these stories enough. Mary grew up literally picking cotton. I saw one of y'all made a joke about picking cotton on the corporate plantation. Mary and her 17 siblings literally grew up in the South, literally picking cotton. That was literally what their job was because they were literal sharecroppers. They were literally struggling and all this other stuff. Well, Mary and her family were still very wealthy. They just didn't have any money. They were wealthy because they had some variables in wealth that I've talked to you guys about. Like they had a lot of children, so that was a lot of labor. Labor is value. That's why slaves were so valuable because they could do labor. So in this case, all the children worked on the family farm, and so that was a form of wealth. They were also wealthy in terms of the fact that they loved each other. All these kids were on code. They listened to mama, they listened to daddy, they cared about the family, they were willing to sacrifice for the family. Uh, they were also wealthy because they were getting love from their parents and guidance from their parents. Their parents had a plan. Their plan was not to sit back and be poor forever. The plan was not to feel sorry for themselves. The plan was not to just sit and complain about white people all day. The plan was to elevate the family. Now, in their family, they just knew they felt that education was important, right? So when it came to education, here's what they did. The family plan was when the first person goes to college, you're going to reach back and help the next kid behind you go to college. And then when that kid goes to college, you're going to reach back and help the one behind you. And then eventually, by the time we get to the fourth or fifth one down the line, they've got 4 or 5 older siblings that are in college that are going to help them get to school. They're going to help them. They're going to show them the ropes. They're going to help send money if they can, because everybody's going to be working. They're going to give advice and support, guidance, all these things that a young person needs to be successful. They had a plan. And do you know that in this family, Mary Stoddard, Dr. Mary Stoddard, look her up. She spoke at the last All Black National Convention. Y'all, I'm sorry, people. We spend all day listening to crazy rappers who are an inch away from a jail cell, got 8 babies mamas, and are out here killing people, but we don't listen to people that actually have a plan. That is the craziest thing in the world to me. That is something that should make you angry. It bothers me. It really makes me mad. It's like, of course you're going to lose because you're listening to all the stupid people. You're listening to people that don't know what the hell they're talking about. You're listening to people who are destined for failure. Why would you listen to people like that and think that you're ever going to succeed on any level? This is what they've done to us psychologically. So Dr. Mary Stoddard, again, who I think should be the most famous person in America, all 17 of her siblings, including her. So I guess there was 18. I don't know if it was 18 or 17. All 17 of them kids graduated from college. And I and I want to lean that against the backdrop of how many millions of kids we got in these public school systems from Chicago to New York to Baltimore who have 10 times more resources and can't even read at grade level, can't do math at grade level, can't even work at McDonald's without needing pictures of the food so they know what a Big Mac is. They can't read Big Mac. They just need to see a picture of it to know that it's a Big Mac. That's to me that's just attitude. That's mindset. That is so much within our control. It's ridiculous. So Mary and all her siblings go to college, and the story's not over yet. Let me tell you, this is what wealth building looks like. This is what strong wealth building core family values looks like. So Mary goes on, and she doesn't go and get pregnant by a bunch of dudes and have a bunch of kids with a bunch of guys. She marries Dr. Marcus Stoddard, who is one of the best black cardiologists in the country. I think Marcus also grew up from humble beginnings. So these are humble people. Stoddard is spelled Stoddard, Stoddard. So she marries Dr. Marcus Stoddard. They have 5 children, 5 assets to the family name. All 5 of Mary's children become MDs or PhDs. Every single one of her 5 children become medical doctors or PhDs. I think Shauna has a PhD in chemistry. Her brother has a PhD in engineering. There's a couple of them that became medical doctors. I think one of them became a doctor, a veterinarian doctor. But every single one of their kids became doctors. Now, I need to understand. I think I understand, but I need to. I want us to meditate on why is it that this is not something that all a story that all of us hear? Why is it that we always hear the dysfunctional stories? Why is it that we always hear the stories about black people who can barely get by, who can't read a book if you hit them in the head with it, who somehow for whatever reason voluntarily make horrible choices and end up in terrible situations? I just want us to really reflect on that a little bit because the answers are out there, the solutions are out there. When I spoke again, I drove through the city of Chicago with some of the worst public schools on the planet. They get billions of dollars in funding. And I drove to speak at the Muhammad University of Islam. And when I spoke at the Muhammad University of Islam, those 12-year-old kids were asking me questions that would be normally asked by graduate students. Do you understand what I'm saying? When I spoke at Freedom Home Academy International, also in Chicago, because I lived in Chicago, they invited me to speak. I spoke there. I saw 7-year-olds who could do advanced math and advanced chemistry at a very high level. 9-year-olds who sounded like they were on their way to college. So the excellence is there. The opportunity to be great is always around us. But for whatever reason, we keep falling into this trap of a mindset. And I think that it comes down to this basic idea that the reason we don't own our destiny or own our assets or own our land and own our property is because somebody actually owns you. It's hard to be an owner when you're already owned. When you can't own your mindset and own your destiny and own your future if somebody else has already claimed you as their property. I believe that there are many examples in this society where I can point to you where black people are seen as an asset that is owned and controlled by somebody else. I believe that the reason these failed Chicago public schools continuously want these kids going to these horrible schools is because they're saying if these kids disappear, how are we going to keep making our money? The corporate plantation needs your labor because they're thinking if black people stop working for us, what are we going to do? And this is not much different from what happened right after slavery. Right after slavery, that was the dilemma. The dilemma was, if we lose our slaves, how are we going to survive economically? We've got to own our black people. So they created the black codes and the prison system to say, okay, well, we're just going to convict you of a crime, and then that'll let us take ownership again of our property. You've always been somebody's property. And so what I want you to do, so part of ownership is very deep in the sense that it's really a commitment to getting away from being owned by other people and start actually owning yourself. And the reason this ties to financial consciousness is because one of the tricks of slavery is to convince the slave that they're not even a slave, to give them the semblance of freedom, to give them the illusion of inclusion, the illusion of choice, to make you believe that you're choosing the life that you have, and even though you're miserable with it and you can't stand it, but you don't feel like you're like, I'm free. Well, if you're really free, then why can't you do what you want? If you're really free, then why can't you say what you, why are you afraid of your boss following you on Facebook and finding out who you really are? I mean, if you're free, why can't you take the day off work tomorrow and spend time with your kids? If you're free, why are you doing this over here instead of doing things for the people that you actually love? Well, because you're not really free. Well, part of it also is because nobody positioned you to be free. So when you talk about black ownership, I would say to you that ownership is deeper than just making a lot of money. I also would say, just in terms of practical advice, when I talk to the kids, I talk to the girls about money, and I say, look, you're pretty girls, you look like your mother. A lot of boys are going to try to impress you with money. If money is of interest to you, here's how you can tell if a guy really has money versus a guy who's just pretending. Lots of men just pretend, and then you get sucked in. Who was it? I kid you not. Somebody just told me a story about a friend they had who married an entertainer. And this woman has a great business. She's making a lot of money, like $100,000 a month or something like that. But she married this entertainer, thinking that this entertainer made more money than her. Well, why? Well, because entertainers are good at signaling. That's what rappers do. They'll go rent some jewelry, rent a fancy car, maybe rent some people, some pretty women, right? Rent their time, rent a fancy house, and signal to you that they have lots of money that they don't actually have. So she really thought this entertainer was doing really well, and then they get married, and she finds out that he doesn't really have any money. He doesn't have income. The reason he was happy to marry her is because she actually owned something, a solid business that actually generated real money. So what happened was, so this lady's furious because she's literally now funding this man's entertainment career where he's making all this music that ain't making no money, ain't bringing no money into the house. Because unfortunately, he too was tricked into this lie that somehow the entertainment industry is the pathway to black economic success. When really it's been the pathway to a lot of misery, a lot of sexual exploitation, a lot of stress and anger and feelings of resentment after somebody got you to sign a contract where you signed your whole life away, right? You see these stories constantly happening. So what really has to occur in the conversations in your families, your kids you got to make sure your kids understand this ain't it. This is not where solid black wealth actually comes from. Solid black wealth comes from understanding that you can't get away from the hard work required in institution building. It requires work, it requires patience. It ain't flashy all the time. It doesn't happen overnight. Like a record deal, it requires you getting your hands dirty, getting in there, committing to something, and working your butt off. And then, even then, it may not work out. But also remember, during our reflection, we talked about this in our training. Being an owner is important, but also knowing how to think like an owner, knowing how to become an owner requires a whole different set of skills than somebody who's simply looking to be managed by an owner. The person looking to be managed by the owner, the person who's raised to have an owner, is a person who is taught to maybe go look for a job and to do what they're told. That's what they're told. They're encouraged to operate on a low vibrational frequency, a low level of consciousness, where the only thing you're conscious of is when am I going to get paid? How much am I going to get paid? And what does my boss want me to do today? That's it. That's what the school system does. The owner has to have a different level of consciousness where they're thinking about the act of institutional management and institutional development. This is why in our Black Business School for Children, Black Millionaires of Tomorrow, we talk about building sturdy children. So the sturdy model, if you recall, it was STERDY. And we did a whole training on it. If you want to go see the training we did on sturdy children, go back to go to drboyceelevate.com, drboyceelevate.com. I think maybe that was lecture number 9 or something. We're doing 30 straight lectures. We're on number 20. Lecture number 9 or 8 or something is when I talked about building sturdy children. If you recall, sturdy stands for training children on systems, how to make money through systems, how to make money through technology, how to make money through entrepreneurship, managing relationships, learning how to delegate tasks. These are the essential skills that are required to manage an asset. Asset managers have to think at a higher level. It's like if I compare myself, if I look at this puppet is the employee, and I'm the boss. So whatever I tell this puppet to do, he's going to do it. If I tell him to flap his lips, he's going to do it. If I tell him to shake his head up and down, he'll do that. If I tell him to turn backward, he'll do that. If I tell him to turn forward, he'll do that. Right. So it does not require a lot for him to simply do what I tell him to do. Right. He's operating on a different level of consciousness. In fact, he has no consciousness. Right. Not to say that anybody who works for other people has no consciousness at all, but that's kind of what it becomes. Right. You do as you're told. Right. But as the person who controls the puppet, I have to think on a higher level. I have to sort of process how my hand movements look, and I have to think about what I want this puppet to do. I have to sort of think about this in a bigger context. I have to look at the big picture. He looks at the little picture. So I think that what we have to do if we want to really have this thing called freedom and everything else with kids is I think you got to teach them how to play the game from the top. Do you know that in America there are schools you go to where they teach you how to get a job, and then there are schools that you go to where they teach you how to manage people who are seeking jobs? Did y'all know that? There's a difference. When you go to Harvard and Yale, they're training you on how to be the boss. They're training you on how to be the owner. And when they talk to you about being the owner, they talk about things like raising capital or managing a team, right? Or how to delegate properly within the system or of your organizational structure. But when you go to another school, you go to like a state school, I know Iowa State or something, they're going to teach you how to fill out the job application and how to get the job. They're not going to talk to you about raising capital and all these other big things that you have to do to be the owner. So the thing with us as a community is that ownership is essential for economic reasons because the people that become successful owners are the ones who become the billionaires and the millionaires that can really fund institutions that you need for a community to be sovereign and strong. Um, it's the ownership. It's important for us in terms of just freedom and power. When you own an entity, when you own land, property, or businesses, you have a couple of things that people who don't own anything do not have. Number one, you have options. Having options, and we talk about stock options. We did a whole stock options training last night. This is not, let's go more primitive than that. You know what it means to have options. A person who has options has greater negotiating power. Integration could have been negotiated better if we had options, but we had no options. We were beggars. When you show up as a beggar to a negotiation, you have no leverage. You cannot negotiate properly. A person who has options, who says, "Oh, well, you know what? I've got $250,000 in stock in the bank. So I know my rent's going to be paid regardless. I know that I'm going to have plenty of food regardless. I know that I'm going to be okay regardless. So I'm going to negotiate with you differently when I have options than I will if I have no options." So this is why going back to the kids, because they're the ones who matter. You and I, we're going to be gone soon in the next 20, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. A lot of us are not going to be here. I'm thinking about the kids and the grandkids. Okay. In order for them to have power in this society and to be able to properly negotiate things like racism or mistreatment, you're going to have to put them in a position where they have options. A person cannot properly negotiate anything in a capitalist society. They can't negotiate sexuality. They can't negotiate professional choices. They can't negotiate anything if they don't have financial options. If you are financially desperate, what happens is you're operating on this level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Remember, we did the training on that too. So drboyceelevate.com if you want to see that training. You're operating on the lower rung of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So you're operating again on dimension one, dimension two. They're operating on dimension four, five, six, and seven. So they're able to control and manage things and think on levels you can't. They can have patience that you can't have. In fact, actually, they show that studies show that in a negotiation, the person that wins a lot of times is the person who has the most time. Remember, I was telling you how time in one of our financial meditations, we talked about how time is so important when it comes to wealth. how time shows up in every financial equation I've ever seen, how time is literally the essential ingredient to do whatever you want to do financially, that I can literally turn any of your kids into a millionaire if you give me enough time. I can show you mathematically how with enough time you can do anything. Well, also in negotiation, studies show, I went through a whole book on negotiation. One of the things that they said is that if you ever want to negotiate properly, never ever show up without having access to lots of time. So if you go buy a car and you say, "Well, I gotta get this car by 5 o'clock today," then you're losing right there, right? Because you're showing that you're desperate. You're showing that you need something to happen. They've got options. They're like, "Oh, well, I can wait. It doesn't matter to me." Blah blah. You're here. They're here. They're gonna have more power than you. So where does time come from? If I'm doing a financial negotiation, what gives me time? If I'm negotiating about a job, what gives me time? Well, I have more time if I have options. If I own assets, if I'm running my own business and I've got a couple $100,000 worth of stock over here, then I don't need your job. I'm okay with that. If somebody reached out to me tomorrow and said, "Hey, Doc, we'd like for you to come and teach at Harvard," which I would not do, but let's say that they did, and I was like, "Okay, well, let me think about it." And they say, "Well, we want to offer you chicken scratch and peanuts to come teach here." I'd say, "No, thank you. I don't want. I'm not gonna. I don't want to do it for that price." Well, don't you want to be at Harvard? No, no, no. I don't need that because my self-esteem is intact. Again, that's another area that's related to wealth, negotiation, all that stuff, right? No, no, no. I'm fine. I'm happy where I am. I'm very proud of where I am. I don't need to be at Harvard to feel better about myself. So no, white people. I'm not gonna let white people sell me my self-esteem. That comes from self. That's why they call it self-esteem, right? And then if they said, "Well, okay, well, we'll offer you a couple $100,000. We'll pay you $200,000 to come take the job." I'll be like, no, no, not really. That's not $200,000 doesn't move the needle for me. It doesn't get me excited. And being at Harvard, I just see a bunch of work, and I don't, whatever. I'm pretty proud to, and like being at the Black Business School, like that's actually makes me feel better about myself than going to Harvard. And then let's say that they keep pushing up the number, okay, 500,000 or whatever. Well, the thing is, here's the thing: I would be in a strong negotiating position because I've got plenty of time and I got plenty of options. There are a million places I can go to make money. There are a million places I can go and be loved. There are a million places I can go and be respected. There are a million places I can go and be happy. Now compare that to me being desperate. This is what happens actually. Even a lot of PhDs go through this. This is why you read those stories out there. Anybody seen those stories about how there are so many PhDs that literally make less money than welfare recipients? They make less than minimum wage. Has anybody ever seen that? Well, there are literally PhDs who spent years in school, who have advanced degrees in really difficult topics, who are literally like eating damn near eating dog food because they don't have any money. In fact, I saw a really interesting TED talk from a black woman who said, I went to Harvard and I'm broke or something like that. It's probably somewhere on YouTube. And she was talking about how she went to Harvard and everybody thought she was rich because she got an MBA from Harvard. And she said, I'd go out to dinner and I'd be checking my bank balance and I'd have like $1.85 in my bank account. And I would escape to the bathroom just to keep from having to pay the bill because everybody assumed that because I went to Harvard, I could pay the bill. Hey, look it up. It's a TED talk. I got to go find it. If I find it, I'll send it to you guys. So anyway, here's the thing, right? Um, if I were desperate, if I had no options, if I had no skill, I couldn't go start a business. If I had nothing else I'd been pouring into and investing in, if I had no resources, no assets saved up, no investments anywhere, I couldn't negotiate like that. I couldn't say, well, nah, I don't know. That's not enough money. You got to crank it up a few $100,000 to even get my attention. I couldn't talk like that. I'd be like, okay, when can I start? I do. Oh, I'd be honored. Oh my God, I'd be so happy, right? That's where we typically are. We're typically negotiating from a position of desperation because we don't have an understanding and an appreciation of the sacrifices required to actually have ownership and options. So really, you could almost say this is the double O. I've never said double O before. It just came to me. That's a good way to remember it. If you have ownership and options, which they're kind of like siblings, that's why the double O. They're like twins, but they're not quite, how twins look alike, but they're not the same. Ownership and options are very similar. They're these really critical siblings that when you show up with the double O, then you can always say no. Right? If you show up with a double O, if you've got some ownership and you've got some options, that can turn a bad negotiation into a good one. That can turn an unfavorable situation to a favorable one. Think about it like dating. If you're ever dating, whenever I would ask, there was a young lady I used to mentor, and she would ask me for relationship advice. And I would say, look, I don't know anything about your relationship with this guy. I don't know this guy, but I can tell you that typically in a relationship negotiation, the person who has the most options usually wins. So never let him catch you without any options. If you're trying to set him straight, then maybe let him accidentally find out that there's five other guys that are waiting to take his place. And I guarantee you there's a good probability that his behavior will change, but you also have to be prepared to walk away in the event that it does not, right? Options. If you have options, then you usually win. Options are valuable. If we'd negotiated integration with ownership and options, integration could have been a beautiful thing. It would have been. It would have been wonderful. We had lots of ownership before integration. We owned Negro leagues. We had our own racing league. We had all kinds of stuff that we don't have right now. And and if we maintained that ownership and said, yeah, okay, we don't mind working around white people. We're willing to do that. We're willing to tolerate that, but we need to keep our ownership of what we have, and we also need to have a plan B in case y'all don't act right. Right? We need somewhere to go, and it's connected, right? We have options because we have ownership, and we have ownership because we want options. If we negotiated integration that way, you would probably see a different outcome than the one you saw when we negotiated from a point of desperation. And it wasn't just desperation, but it came from desperation and admiration for white people that we did not have for ourselves. You say, why would you spend time around black people when you could be around white folks? That makes you beautiful. That makes you special. They're better looking than us. They're smarter than us. They're just better people than we are because we just a bunch of Negroes. So a lot of this ownership conversation really links right back to your self-esteem. Is, you know, when you talk about, I came from my daddy that raised me is a proud Southern black man. He is like a George Jefferson type of guy. You know, he wasn't scared of nothing. He had a Napoleon complex. He was the smallest guy in the room, but he was always the baddest dude in the room. You know, that was kind of his little thing. And the thing about having his own stuff, having his own land, and having his own money, and having you know, his credit score together and everything else was that just made him proud. He said, because that's what I want to be as a man. I want to be proud of myself. I'm not groveling and begging anybody. He'd rather die than to grovel, right? So some of y'all have pride. And I don't think there's anything wrong with having pride. That does not make you uppity. That does not make you a bad person. That does not make you arrogant. I think pride can be a good thing, right? As long as it's healthy, right? But I have pride. Like I want to say, no, I'm black and intelligent. No, I'm a good person, and I'm a hardworking person. I ain't scared of nobody. I ain't backing down from nothing, right? That makes me feel good to say these things, right? And it just there's something about that I think sometimes we lose when we are on our knees, sort of following behind these people who are pretty mediocre in their own right, right? They don't. It's not that they're better than us. We just think that they're better because maybe they have more money and more power. And so sometimes you'll see this. You'll see people go to Hollywood and they'll align themselves with a bunch of weirdos, like a lot of weirdness. Has anybody ever seen how weird? Like, you ever looked at those Balenciaga fashion shows? You know, Balenciaga. I think I hope I said it right. I don't know, but it's one of those famous brands that they do the Paris fashion shows. Has anybody ever seen how weird these people are and the weird stuff that they'll walk down, they'll do a fashion show where somebody have like a telephone on their head. It'll be like, and I'm like, why would I want to align myself with a bunch of weirdos? Oh, I get it. It's because they have ownership and they have wealth and power, and there's a certain prestige that you gain by aligning yourself with these weirdos because you don't respect what you actually have, that you actually own and control yourself, right? So they can get away with being weird because they're white and weird, and they're white, wealthy and weird. WWW. When they're white, wealthy and weird, we would rather be around things that are white, wealthy and weird than to be around things that are black and proud, even if we're still in the building phase and they've already built the institution. I don't want to be around white, wealthy and weird. I want to be around black and proud. And that's why I would argue, this is my point I'm going to make. This is the last thing I'm going to say, is I argue that ownership needs to be the rallying cry for our whole community, for the whole next generation. Let me know if you agree. I think ownership, 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 ownership should be right there. Now, remember the thing about ownership, though, is that ownership does not mean that you own and control everything that you're a part of, or that you're always the boss, or that you're always, because sometimes if you're too caught up in ownership, you can think that you can't collaborate and partnership. So ownership and partnership are connected. Sometimes the best forms of ownership come through partnership and collaboration. This is where the R in sturdy comes from, so relationships, right? So if you build relationships with other people who also want to own things, and nobody's greedy, and everybody's on the same page, and everybody wants to work together, everybody believes in what you're building, then you can develop something that's amazing where everybody gets a chance to be an owner, everybody gets a chance to feel powerful, everyone gets a chance to feel safe, and then everybody gets to win. So don't ever think that ownership means, this is a big issue that I've seen in the community that I really want to kind of address for a second, is I see a lot of people who think ownership means being solo all the time. So they'll have a good partnership with another person and say, oh, but I kind of always wanted to have my own thing. Well, maybe you have your own thing. You just have 50% of something great instead of having 100% of something not so great. So why can't you simply understand that ownership can also mean partnership? It can mean collaboration. But ownership, 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 that is the key to power. You own good institutions, you pour into them, and those little institutions become big. The more time you spend pouring into things that you own and control, the less energy you will waste pouring into the ownership of other people who do not care about you. That if we do that, if we have that mindset, if we raise our kids to think that way, then what happens is we are opening the entire universe to these kids. The universe is open to them. Now, instead of their pay being capped at a $250,000 a year because he's a good engineer, he might make $250 million a year. He might make $10 billion a year because he becomes the next Mark Zuckerberg. But it can only happen if he's prepared to fly at that altitude. A truck driving down the road can never do what an airplane does. So if you want that truck to fly, you're gonna have to build it with special equipment. Do you understand? A truck with wheels can never fly like a jet airplane. So if we're building our kids, so the question we have to ask ourselves is, are we building our children to be trucks? Or are we building them to be airplanes? I believe every black child that has, especially those that have talent, intelligence, and ambition, and a lot of your children fit the description. A lot of your grandkids have that in them. Every child that wants greatness, that loves their people and loves themselves, should be equipped to fly. They should be equipped to have the consciousness. Remember, there's that word consciousness again, to elevate, and you should equip them. You don't put just wheels on them, you give them wings. So replace the wheels with some wings so that baby can go to the moon. I want those kids up there. I want them owning things. I want them working together. I want them to get to the top of the clouds and find other people up there with them. I don't want them to say it's lonely at the top. I want them to say it's crowded at the top because we all got raised to go to the top and we're flying above the traffic. Like I told you all that story about how I was so fascinated when I was able to elevate and fly in an airplane, and I flew to Gary, Indiana. That was where we flew to. And I remember looking down and I felt so good. I told my wife that day, because my wife gets nervous every time I get in an airplane. But I told her, I said, I flew to Gary, where my mother-in-law lives. Her mama's name is Nana, and I love her. I said, I flew to Nana's house and I was flying above all this traffic. I looked down on I-80 where all these cars, you know how we drive to I-80, you know how long it takes when the traffic gets bad? She said, yeah. I said, I saw bumper to bumper traffic the whole time, and I was above all of that. And I got to Nana's house in 20 minutes when you and I both know it takes at least an hour and 2 hours on a bad day. That was powerful. That was awesome. Right. So what I want is, I really want, in terms of skill and mindset, I just want our kids to have wings. I don't want them sitting in the traffic jam, right? And I want, and the other thing too is, it's just like war, where you don't have just one airplane that goes off to battle. You have a formation of thousands of airplanes that are all going out here and going to battle together. So they shouldn't say it's lonely at the top. They should say it's crowded up. There's so many other people, so many people I can collaborate with. And these kids are flying at the highest level, and they are flying in formation, and then when they go off to battle, they can do some damage because they're up here, everybody else is down here. That's how these kids are going to win. It starts with mindset. It starts with understanding ownership. Ownership connects to options. I want our kids to have options because options pretty much are the cousin of freedom. A free person is a person with options. A person with no options can never be free. But typically, ownership and freedom come from options. So keep that in mind. Those are the words for today. I hope this conversation has benefited you because I don't know about you, but every time I talk about this, I get pumped up. I get excited because I think that there's a whole universe of opportunity out here for us if we carry the right mindset. So, anyway, that's it. I'm going to be done for today. I'm done. I'm done. It was great to see you. We're going to meet tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for day 21 of our financial consciousness training. If you want to get all the recordings of every training that we've done so far, go to drboyceelevate.com. All the materials are yours for life. I would encourage you to consider going through it all with your family. If you can get, if you got family members, they get it. You can share it with them, and I really believe that this shift is going to be the thing that can help take your family to the next level in the next generation. So feel free to do that. Also, if you want to get any of our trainings for kids, stuff like that, text the word youth to 87948. Text youth to 87948. I will text you stuff on our Black Millionaires of Tomorrow program if you'd like to see that. And that's it, guys.